Mexico, Mexico. Sous ton soleil qui chasse, le temps paraît trop court pour goûter au bonheur de chaque jour. Mexico.
And welcome to the Two Saltines podcast. I am Dwayne Rollins here in Toronto. Just before coming on the air, Kevin, I was feeling like a little hungry and I wanted a quick little snack, so I went into my fridge and I grabbed a Baby Bell cheese and I ate it, and then halfway through I realized, oh, this is a Saputo product. What am I doing? I'm from Toronto. I'm not supposed to support Joey.
You can't get away from it. If it's cheese and if it's in Canada, I think there's a 99% it went through Joey's hands first.
All right. Well, I do like the Baby Bells. It is good cheese. Alrighty, Kevin. We're going to talk about CCL. We got Nick Sabetti from Goal on to break down the Impact's CCL chances. Talk a little bit about the season to come. Maybe touch a little bit on the what we talked about at the end of last week with the controversy, I guess, that no Impact players were on the Canadian U17 player, despite the fact that the team does lead the USSDA league, which is a mouthful. Why did they rename that thing?
And it sounds like the cheese organization that follows the food more than a soccer league.
The United States Soccer Development Academy. That is what it is. But at any rate, and we're not in the United States, so I don't know why we're in that league. Toronto isn't, but the other two teams are. We'll leave that well enough alone for now. We're going to talk tomorrow, actually. We have Tim Holt, the president of USL, is going to be on the show. So we will have a special show that will come out tomorrow. This is our weekly show. We're going to talk today, though, to focus back on today about the CBA, Argos to BMO, Carl Robinson's desire for the Whitecaps to score more goals. Maybe we'll talk about the Whitecaps, New Jersey, with their fake mountains on their chest now or something. I don't know. It's a jersey. I'm not a fashion guy. I'm not on the red carpet, but we'll talk about it anyway. And we'll wrap up with a little bit of talk about the national team. But before we do all that, Kevin, how are things over your way?
I think the buzz has finally gained Montreal. People are starting to be excited. Montreal Ultras are in Mexico right now with supporters, about 30 of them, getting ready for that Pachuca game last night, and they had a weekend of soccer to remember. Seeing the Cruz Azul Chivas derby, seeing the Pumas game, seeing the Tigres. I wish I was in Mexico, Dwayne.
We all wish we were in Mexico, and not just to watch soccer, but we talk about the weather too much on this podcast. It's minus 28 or something, in case you're curious. Those folks listening in the southern United States, we hate you. But we move on. All right, let's take a quick break. Bring Nick on. Talk Impact.
Ok, à la prochaine. Excellent, merci. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I'm in love with real coke. I'm in love with real coke. We got it, now it's over. I'm in love with real coke. I'm in love with real coke. I'm in love with real coke. We got it, now it's over. I'm in love with real coke.
And welcome back to the Two Saltines podcast. Nick Sabetti from Gold joins us now to talk about the Montreal Impact's offseason and the game that's happening in, when's it, 2 days from now?
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. Wow. The season starts. Might be the only game we get to see in a while if the CBA doesn't get figured out, but we digress. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, so thanks for having me.
Let's start there. What are your expectations heading into this two-game tie?
Well, it's a difficult one to predict. Well, obviously, I think the Impact going into this game are huge underdogs. We know very well that the Mexican League is a good step above the MLS in terms of budget, in terms of money they're able to spend on players, and the overall quality of the teams. And I think Pachuca, they've been a team that's been struggling, but are still one of the better teams in the league. So it's going to be very difficult for the Impact, and it's a difficult one to predict. I say that because the Impact are going to be is going to field a very different team than the one that we saw last year, because they signed 11 players over the off season. So in that sense, it's a difficult one to predict. It's difficult. I mean, they did play a few friendly games, but it's still It's hard to know those friendly games don't really mean all that much. So, in that sense, it's, I know the Impact are going to feel a 4-2-3-1. They have some injuries to contend with, but it's difficult to say, how they're going to approach this. I would think that they're going to be very defensive and try and keep things tight as long as possible. But other than that, it's going to be a really tough game for them. That's kind of the main expectation right now.
Coming off of the comments by Joe Saputo, I guess a week and a half ago now, about the city not properly supporting the club, whatever that means. How important do you think it is, though, for the Impact to at least be competitive in these two games, to give the home fans a show coming off of the disappointing season last year?
Oh, for sure. I think it's an amazing opportunity, because if they can, so I think the tickets. I think there hasn't been, Saputo said there wasn't any buzz about this team, and that's true. I think after last season, it was a terrible season in Montreal sporting landscape. If you're not the Canadiens, you need to be winning, or you're not supported. And I think that's essentially what's happened at the Impact, where last year was an awful season. The year before was a better season, was a pretty good season, and they were selling out. Last year, they were averaging about 13,000, 14,000. So, and the off season they did sign a lot of players, but they didn't necessarily sign any kind of big name star that can really, where, obviously Giovinco is a big star and people were waiting for him at the airport, but there wasn't that kind of impact signing that the fans were expecting after such a bad season. They did sign Laurent Simon, so that even though he's not necessarily a huge name, he looks like I haven't seen too much of him, but he seems like a very high-profile player, someone that can help the back line. But still, they've changed the team a lot, but it hasn't been sufficient to kind of create a real buzz. So if they can get a result, if they can somehow get a result in Mexico and at least put them in a position where the second game in Montreal means something, or that there's still something to play for. They can go for it, or there's a chance that they can get through, and maybe that can kind of create some buzz. Obviously, if they can, get a draw or get a win somehow in Mexico, that would obviously be. I think that would create a lot of buzz going in the second game, and maybe that could be kind of kickstart their season a bit and get people create kind of new interest again. But it's going to be difficult. Obviously, I think these two games are essential for creating interest. Obviously, if they just go to Pachuca tomorrow and just lose 3-4-0, and then the second game probably only be about 15,000-20,000 maybe, and then it's just kind of back to sort of this interest that we saw last year. So, these games are essential.
On the pitch, there's a lot of new players, like you were saying, that are going to play their first competitive game for Montreal tomorrow night. The Simon, Soumare, Rio Coker, Donadel. And a lot of those players, international players, have experience on hostile territories, especially Nacho Piatti in those conditions. How do you expect Nacho Piatti to play tomorrow night against Pachuca? And do you think the flair and the experience he does have in those type of environment are going to help the Impact maybe pull a miracle in Pachuca?
Yeah, certainly Piatti is a player that the Impact will be counting on if they're going to get a result. If they're going to get something out of this, score a goal, if they're going to get through this round, I think Piatti will be fundamental for that. He's obviously their best player. He has so much experience in these environments, like you said. And he's also someone that, Pachuca, I think, usually play about a 4-4-2, and their center midfielders are usually very aggressive in the pressing. So there could be some nice space for Piatti to play in between the lines. So that could be maybe an area that they can exploit. But yeah, I would say if they're going to get something out of this, Piatti's going to be. Has to be on his game. The problem is he's coming back from an operation that I think is I forget what now, but it's not clear what kind of fitness he's going to be in. kind of whether he'll be able to play. I remember when the first week in training, Kopas was saying that he may not be able to start the first game. It seems like he'll start, but it's not clear whether he'll even be able to play a full 90 minutes or so. That you worry about the sharpness of the player, so that's kind of a concern.
A couple of other injuries heading into this season. This week you have Romero, who's traveling back to Montreal, is going to miss the week. And you have Kamara injured and Oyongo suspended and still in Africa. What do you expect for the defense? And what do you think about Oyongo's situation?
Well, I would say the defense would probably be Toye at left back, Samare, Simon, and Cabrera. Who's a center back. They picked him up on loan from Boca Juniors on loan. Mm-hmm. So I would expect that to be the back four, which is an entirely new back four, which hasn't, which again, they haven't had those. I'm not sure that those four players, they haven't had a chance to play with each other in an actual game. So you do worry about the chemistry, the understanding, and they're obviously going to have a lot of defending to do against Pachuca. So that's going to be difficult. In terms of Oyongo, it's kind of an unfortunate situation. It's a bit strange because he was a player that everyone kind of knew that he was a player that wanted to go to Europe and didn't necessarily want to be in MLS anymore, and so. I'm not sure the Impact really did their due diligence in this case. They should have probably at least maybe inquired with the player beforehand to speak to him about where, prior to the trade. Seems like that didn't happen. They just kind of went on with the trade. So, in a sense, now it's difficult. The Impact are trying to kind of remain strong on the case. They're trying to they're trying to be kind of aggressive with it, but if the guy doesn't want to come to if he doesn't want to play for the Impact, there's, in a certain sense, they're better off trying to at least move him, rather than kind of keep him. It's difficult to keep a player that doesn't want to be here. So it's an unfortunate situation for the Impact because. They don't really have a left fullback otherwise. I mean, they have Toya, they have Tissot, who I think is probably better at left midfield, but that was a weakness for them. In the last couple of years, they haven't really had a left fullback, and Oyongo was an interesting player. He's player potential, so if they don't have him, that's a big blow for them, for sure. Going into the season, it's just another player that they got to go and get now.
Moving away from the CCL for a moment to focus the attention on the league, with the amount of additions that they've had, do you think it's realistic that Montreal can come together and improve to the level that they can realistically challenge for a playoff spot? Now, six teams in, 2 expansion teams in there, but is that a realistic expectation?
It's difficult to say. I think it's realistic, but it's such a funny league in a sense. It's difficult to know really. I mean, you would think that this would be the ideal season to make. Obviously, now there's 6 teams instead of 5 making the playoffs, and you have 2 expansion teams in the East. But but Orlando and New York City look pretty good. So and a lot of teams have gotten better. I would say it's. I think they can. I think they have the. I think they potentially could make. I don't see them as necessarily like in the top 3, but I see them perhaps maybe making a challenge for 4 or 5 or 6 potentially. Maybe at best they make it in the 3rd, 4th spots. They don't have a bad starting 11. I mean, a lot of it depends on how Simon turns out, how Simon Samare, if they can really. If Simon can settle into the league and they really solidify the backline, I think that will help a lot. The midfield concerns me. Not that Brio Coker and Donadal aren't bad players, but you just worry over the course of a long season how they're going to be able to hold out if in terms of injuries and whatnot. So it's certainly a much better team than it was last year, and you also have to remember that they have Piatti from the beginning, and I thought Piatti was tremendous when he came over. I think he's probably one of the top attacking players in this league. He's someone that creates, he scores. So having him from the beginning is pretty huge. Although they didn't get a striker. I mean, they were looking for a striker in the offseason. I think if they had managed to get a designated player, a designated striker in the offseason, I think that probably would have given them I think would have, not guaranteed, but I would say made them a really serious playoff team. But now I don't know, it's difficult to say. It's just, I would say you worry. My concern is really, from a psychological standpoint of, if they go to Pachuca tomorrow and lose 4-0, and then they start the season on the road and they have some injuries and things kind of go south from the get-go, like last year, you worry of this team, how they'll be able to cope with that, and especially because a lot of the players don't really like to coach very much, so that doesn't help either. But you just worry if things don't go well in the beginning, if they'll be able to kind of dig themselves out of that. That would kind of be my concern. But it's difficult to say. It's the Eastern Conference I think it's very tight. I think the playoff race is going to be it's going to be down to the wire, really, especially now with 6 spots. I think everyone's kind of in it. I don't see any team that's really kind of. I don't think the Impact will be an amazing team, but I don't see them. I see them in contention for a while at least.
If we're looking at 2015, it's the first time the Montreal Impact got the same head coach as the year prior in Major League Soccer. Do you think that Klopas is going to be the guy at the end of the season to be the head coach of Montreal, or maybe the presence of Enzo Caccino is going to put pressure on him?
Yeah, the Enzo Caccino hiring is interesting because I think it suggests that. For me, it seems like if they do need to make a switch, that Caccino would be the guy that they would slot in. Obviously, he was a guy that they had discussions with back in 2012 to replace Marsh. In the end, they went with Schallibaum, but he's always been someone very close to the club. Obviously, considerable experience in Europe, and so he was assistant coach last year in DC. So, no, I think I think he's a guy that they would be very comfortable with putting in as head coach. So. And Klopas, obviously, I think he's walking on thin ice right now. I don't think they kept him on at the end of last season because they thought really he was a great coach or like that. I think it was a matter of not wanting to fire a third coach in 3 years and how that would look. So, in that sense, I don't, I think this is Klopas' last year. After this, he has an option for a third year. But it's going to take something really special. I think it's going to take a really good season for him to stay on for next year. For me, honestly, I don't see him staying on more than this year. But for sure, if things don't go well in these first 10 games, 10 games of this season, I see the Impact pulling the trigger for sure, like without any hesitation.
Nick, we'll end the interview with a look to the future a bit. Last week we talked about the fact that there were no Impact players on the Canadian U17 roster, and perhaps that was an illustration of them not getting a proper look, proper chance. Sean Fleming admitted to me in a press conference that he only saw them play twice. So just in terms of the state of the Impact Academy, with FC Montreal coming in this year as well at the very top of that chain, kind of, what are your thoughts on the thought of the Academy now? Is it fair to say that perhaps the Canadian national team overlooks some players, some talent there?
It's possible that they overlook some players. My impression is, the Impact's Academy is newer than the other ones. It's newer than the Toronto and Vancouver academies. I think are probably, I would say, behind them in a certain sense from a talent standpoint. I don't think that they have necessarily the talent is in this. Even the players that we've seen come up, up from the academy to the first team, I don't think that they necessarily ready for MLS yet. Whereas maybe the ones that we're seeing coming up through Vancouver right now, and even in Toronto, are probably more MLS ready than the Impact players. So I think they're behind. I'm not sure if on the U17 level, if they're just being overlooked, or if maybe The players in Toronto and Vancouver are a bit, maybe the level is a little bit higher maybe. But it's still something it's still, the academy is still very new. It's still, I think it's about 4 years old. So there's still a lot of work there that needs to be done. They just kind of extended the academy down to age 8 or age 7, under 7 under 8 level. So just last year. So it's still something that's it's still a project that's still being kind of worked out and figured out in a way. So I can't really speak about the quality of the U17 level, but my impression would be that the Toronto and Vancouver academies are a step ahead, I would say. So it doesn't surprise me that we get more players from the other academies, to be honest with you.
Is it your general impression that they're getting the best players, the best
Quebec players?
Sorry, say that again. I thought you cut out for a second.
Do you think that Montreal and the Impact, the Academy, are getting the best players in Quebec right now?
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe they don't. I know that Toronto Sea Academy, they really, they have much. I guess they do maybe more work in terms of going out and kind of gathering all the players that are available and looking at all. But yeah, I would say maybe the Impact could probably do a better job in terms of going around across Quebec and looking at players and creating doing more tryouts and doing more kind of outreach. But yeah, that's something that they could probably do a better job at. I don't know that if they're missing out on players, but yeah, that's certainly an area where they probably should do probably a better job, I would say, in terms of going out and kind of putting their name out there in a sense, and like creating tryouts and creating camps and whatnot, and then looking at players. I think they probably do a better job at that.
All right, Nick Sabetti from Gold joined us. Thanks again, Nick, and enjoy the game tomorrow.
All right, thank you. Take care, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nick.
And welcome back. Thanks again to Nick for joining us. Always good with his time. Kevin, what are your thoughts on the Impact's chances?
Well, on the chances, my thoughts are there are not a lot of chances. I'm a little bit like Nick. I hope that there is a hope for Montreal when they come back to the Stade Olympique. I hope that Montreal keeps it 2 goals, maybe 2 goals, maximum 3, but 2 in reach of 2. If it's 2-1, 3-1 Pachuca, 1 goal for Montreal away could be the difference. I don't know if that's going to happen, but Montreal having a lot of new players that are different. Piatti, we're talking about players with experience in those hostile environments, like me and Nick were saying. I hope that does have an effect on the team, but hopefully, I still think Montreal is going to have to work really hard and have to be really lucky to get a result in Mexico.
I think is it fair to say that the fans that are going to go out to watch this, the ones that are going to be there regardless of the scoreline, are sophisticated enough, understand enough about how much of a mismatch on paper this is to appreciate sort of a close but no cigar kind of result for Montreal if they're competitive? Do you think that will have traction?
Yes, but for their safety, I hope that Montreal is competitive, but Pachuca is dominating. If you remember 2009 in Santos Laguna and Torreon, what happened to the supporters, and I have that from first-hand account, is when Montreal was winning, because they scored in Montreal 2 goals before, well, the atmosphere, and they were not feeling really safe. They were being harassed, things thrown at them. As soon as Santos Laguna scored, eventually, the mood between the supporters group became more friendly, and at the end, they exchanged jersey. But at the beginning, it was iffy, and people were actually scared. So hopefully for their safety, it goes well. Before our morale and for the sport competition, I hope Montreal does well.
All right, well, at least you get a game to watch soon, and you know you're going to get to watch a game, and we're not all sure of that, which is my say. Yeah, you get to 2 for sure. That might be the last thing we see, that last game a week from now. But Let's segue into the CBA talk. There was an article today in ESPN FC, which does outline this. So a lot of the information that I'm relaying right now comes from there. There's good reporting consistently on ESPN FC if you're looking for consistent, more close, not daily, but closer to daily. It's not going to be reported like the NHL lockout. We don't have anyone, reporters standing in the cold in New York streets like we did a couple of years ago. But it's good there. At any rate, the nuts and bolts of that story and what other stories are suggesting as well is that the players remain steadfast in their demand for movement rights. And I keep calling it movement rights rather than free agency because that's what we're talking about here, the right to pick where we're going to work. I mean, a lot of people will be cynical and they'll think of free agency in the sense of a bigger sport in North America, and we'll think it's about money. It's not really about money. It's about choice. And they believe that they've earned that, and the owners on the other side of it believe in the single entity model, and they feel that free agency will put that at risk, and they are saying that they're not budging on that. One of the suggestions that was being made is the league is essentially going to try and bribe its way into this, for lack of a better way to put it, drastically increase the salary cap, which I think most fans will like, and they're going to increase the minimum salary level up to something closer to a living wage. Right now, the minimum salary is in the $30,000 range, although most players make $44,000. That is the true minimum salary, but you can make $33,500 if you're on I think it's $33,500 if the last I looked anyway on the development roster. So they're going to increase that significantly, is how it's said, and increase the salary cap in the hopes that's going to be the league's offer, in the hopes that they will bend on the free agency side of things.
So are you still expecting a strike? Because if we're looking at the players' point of view, the players are staying their ground. They're saying that they will continue to put pressure and they're not going to quit until they have their freedom of movement. So do you expect maybe a strike on March 4th in the morning?
Well, that is a really difficult question to answer, and because no one is entirely convinced that the players have, when the push comes to shove, and when you're looking at losing wages, and again, we've just got saying that you have guys that are in this union that make $44,000 a year. How do you keep a condo? How do you live in two cities in some cases? I know that a lot of them will share apartments and things like that, and but at the same time, you're not making a ton of money. Just like any worker that's facing a workout situation, it's a lot different to be strong and strong-willed and to put the threats out there when you're not facing a paycheck gone. But when the paycheck's off the table, it's hard to look past that.
Absolutely, and it's going to be interesting because, again, when we're looking at Major League Soccer and the Players Union, in my opinion, you can always split that in two, if you can say. The top money makers, the DPs and the millionaires in one part, and the rest of the players on the other side. And it's going to be interesting to see who buckles first, but who gets more, whose voice is heard the loudest, maybe.
It's funny, there's an irony here, too, that a lot of people, again, make the mistake of thinking free agency benefits the top-level players. The top-level players effectively have free agency right now because they can go anywhere in the world. And they can also, as we've seen with Jozy Altidore, or we've seen with other big-name players, Gerard coming in, they can essentially say, I'm only going to go there, and that's because they're so big. Jermaine Jones last year, a great example of that. They tend to get what they want. So they really have free agency right now. What free agency is going to benefit are the middle-class players the most, guys that are effective MLS players that every team needs, that are going to have more control, finally going to have some control, because they're not going to get signed by Europe, these guys, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the guys that they need to deal with. So this is the great irony of it, because not irony, it's the great sort of dilemma that they face, because ultimately I think the only way that a longer strike, a strike to dig in would work is if some of those older players, some of those sort of wealthier players were able to supplement the strike fund in a greater level than the middle class guys, to make sure that they're getting something close to what they would normally be getting so that they can just simply eat, right, and survive. So you would need the DPs, I think, pooling together their resources to help their common man out there. And I don't know whether the will is out there for them to do that. I don't know, honestly. It might be. When you hear Michael Bradley talking strong about this, and he certainly is one of those guys that would have to put some more money into this situation, you could have some hope if you're on the player side of this. But at the same time, would the foreign guys care that much? Like Javinko, do you think he really came over here to walk with a picket sign? No. Like he probably is. This is probably catching him a bit off guard. I'm sure his agent informed him a little bit of what's going on, but it's kind of foreign to them in other ways too, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting situation all around.
And we'll have development coming in really soon because, again, it's been quiet for the last couple of weeks because there's a non-spoken agreement between the two parties that they want to let those CONCACAF Champions League game play out. But right after the final whistle on March 3rd, I'm expecting news to go really fast, Wayne.
Yeah, they have the mediator in the room too, and the report to finish the sort of the reporting aspect of this suggested that the mediators only actually held one meeting where they've been in the same room at the same time, rather they're sort of going back and forth and negotiating with them and trying to wrap up some of the issues that aren't really contentious. Mm-hmm. That's a common strategy in labor negotiations. If nothing's moving on the big issues, then you look down and you try and solve a small issue with the hope that will get the ball rolling down the hill, right? Yeah. For instance, we've heard that they've come to an agreement on moving expenses. It's absurd that they had to go to this. I mean, you're pulling people out of one city and putting them into another city and not giving them moving expenses. Some teams weren't, because before it was reliant upon each individual club to pay the moving expenses. It was their own discretion. Now, from the sound of it, it's going to be written in the CBA that a player gets X amount automatically. It'll probably come from the league office. We've heard that appearance fees are standardized now. So if a player is asked to go to whatever Target and sign jerseys for a while, not in Canada, they won't be going to Target, but they get a certain fee. So that's those things have been solved. We've heard, but the bigger stuff again, it's just they're not moving. Now, look, it really comes down to one issue. And it's this free agency issue. So what I've wondered, and this is what I'm saying now is speculation, not reporting, whether there's a hybrid model out there that would satisfy both parties. I speculated the following. Bear with me here a little bit. This is what I suggested. There is a way in my mind to create free agency within a single entity model, and the way it would work is that they're still only going to negotiate with one body, and that being the league, to get their salary. So basically, at the end of a contract, a player says, I want to opt for free agency. That means that they forfeit the right to negotiate a salary with any individual club, and instead must negotiate the salary with MLS headquarters. Once that salary is negotiated and they come to whatever figure that they agree upon and they sign the MLS contract, that player is then free to see if anyone in MLS is interested to take him. So then they're dealing with they're dealing with the market, the freer market, in terms of their right to move, but they're not necessarily dealing with the freer market in the state of trying to get their salary up, which is the other aspect of free agency. So that might be a hybrid model that I've suggested. You could work with that at any different level, any different kind of combination to try and get your own solution. But to me, that's some kind of hybrid thing that gives them movement choices, but not necessarily inflating the financial side of things up. That's to me where a solution might be found on the free agency side.
Because that's the one thing Major League Soccer does not want it to happen. They don't want their clubs to together fight or bid on the same player and make that salary go up. They do not want an escalation on salary between players from the same league, because they're not trying to compete against each other. They're a single entity. So I think that idea, that option could work, Dwayne, because in that aspect, it would only be the player's salary doesn't matter. It's just who wants to bid for me, who's got enough allocation, or whatever the process is, who wants me. And I can go there. My salary doesn't matter. It's the league that signed it. And it's going to be, with allocation, they'll fix something. We all know MLS work behind the scenes. But at least that way, they will have a certain freedom of movement.
Yeah, and the resistance, I can anticipate what the resistance to that idea would be, to even that idea, even to that level of free agency, would be this, I call it the parody of parody. It's, the league is obsessed, or some certain fans are obsessed with this idea of parity, which doesn't really exist in MLS. There are have and have-nots anyway, right? Yep. The LA Galaxy totally betray the idea that MLS is a league based on equal parity. There already are inherent advantages. And in fact, I will argue that if you take the ability for a player to choose off the table and force them into this kind of like background stuff where only the top guys have choices, you're giving more advantage to the big clubs because then the stuff like location and past winning plays a bigger role in their decisions if you're taking everything else off. So, the parity of parity, like I said, is something that we need to drop. I also, and this is an argument, more of a philosophical argument that we might have in Five Rings or something, but it's I just don't think parity isn't good for a league. I don't know why people have got it in their mind that it is. It's mediocrity, and they need to allow these teams or clubs that want to excel.
Yep, the lowest common denominator is a synonym for parity in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. On that note, Kevin, we're obviously going to talk a lot about this, and there are a lot of other issues that are going on around it. But we'll drop it off for today, and we'll take a quick break now. We'll come back and talk a bit about the Toronto Argonauts and BMO Field.
Thanks for listening to the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast with Kevin Laramie and Dwayne Rollins. You can reach the guys on Twitter at 24th Minute and at Kevin Laramie, or both of them at Two Solitudes Pod. Reach the guys on email, twosolitudespodcast@gmail.com, but especially subscribe on Stitcher Radio. Now back to the show.
Argos. Go away. Yeah. The Toronto Argonauts, there's been a lot of reporting there that we're down to crunch time in the Argos to BMO story, which has been ongoing for over a year now. However, Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Star reported last week that basically they're at crunch time right now in the negotiations, and there are negotiations that are ongoing to get in there. I wrote a sort of a call to arms piece on Canadian Soccer News to TFC fans, to Canadian soccer fans as well, because it's a national stadium. It does have an interest, I think, to all Canadians, really. Just asking them to keep putting the pressure up there, because as much as it seems hopeless that they're going to come and they're going to wreck the stadium, which we all kind of feel, but you got to keep trying right to the end. And I have heard, and others have reported, it was reported on Primetime Sports, actually. Bob McCowan, of all people, was talking about the soccer side of this on Friday. If you listen to that, I almost fell down when I heard that, because dear Bob is not generally seen as the biggest soccer supporter, but there was one of the few conversations I've heard that takes the soccer perspective into play, and was suggesting that it was kind of absurd to move the Argos into BMO because of the soccer perspective. Was on Primetime Sports this past Friday, and in that conversation, and again, this is something that I've heard offhand as well, it was suggested that there is significant resistance to it within the Rogers side of MLSE's board, for that very reason, that they feel that they're going to screw the soccer team over. And why would you do that? Because you're going to, the other side of that is they feel that the Argos are hopeless anyway. This isn't a CFL podcast, so I don't have to mince words here. They're maybe not wrong. There is a chance, and Mr. McCowan, to go back to his conversation, is someone who understands the Argos financing, because he's good friends with the former owners of the Argos, the guys that screwed soccer over a few years ago. So he kind of knows what the books look like, and he has said on that show many times that the Argos lose like $5 million a year instantly. Like, there's just no way to make it a successful franchise. That's a feeling that many people have within business circles in the city of Toronto, whereas TFC, and this is something that a lot of people here don't understand, is very profitable. And it's not very profitable simply because of fans going to games at BMO. It's very profitable because of the MLS market, because of the soccer nerd marketing, because of a lot of different factors that make that property a hell of a lot more valuable to MLSE than the Argos ever could be. So this idea that they're going to put this failing team in really doesn't hold a lot of water or logic, unless it's a political play. It's a favor, because there's a lot of sentimentality around this issue, especially with local politicians who don't want to be seen as the guys that let this 100-year-old tradition go away. And look, I'm not a CFL podcast. I don't mind the CFL. I watch the odd games. I used to cover CIS football. I like Canadian football, but at this point it's not my battle, guys. And if they fail, they fail. The Alouettes went away for a few years and came back stronger than ever. And to me, that might be what the Argos need to do at this point. They need to pause, sit dormant for a couple years, keep the name going, build a stadium of their own where they control revenues. That's the thing that no one talks about too. They won't have any revenue sources at BMO Field. It's just kind of it's a Band-Aid that's going to keep them alive for a couple more years on life support. But if they're not controlling dates, they're not controlling revenue, then what the hell is gained for it for them? Forget about us for a second. I don't get it from a CFL perspective either. It's just desperation.
They're trying to recreate what happened in Montreal, Dwayne. Then Montreal was, yes, they came back stronger, but when they came back in '96, they were playing at the Big O, and it was not what it is today. When they decided to go full-time outdoors with a stadium that it doesn't look the same as the BMO, but the essence of it, the nature of it being an outdoor stadium, it's still the same, and it did help Montreal. So I guess that's a blueprint they have for what they're trying to do in Toronto, but you don't need to... You don't rob one guy. I was going to say you don't rob Paul to give to whoever else. I don't remember the exact name of that expression, but you don't need
Peter
to do that.
Yeah, give to Paul. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not
No,
Peter
and
Paul,
you're-
exactly.
yeah, something. Yeah, we'll just make it up. We'll make our own expressions up. That's more fun. But at any rate, you're absolutely right. That is their thinking. That's their mantra. That you move them into a small, intimate stadium. That suddenly the atmosphere grows better. It becomes more of a party, which is absolutely what Molson Stadium is, right, on game day. Although I think it's calmed down a little bit in the recent years. But especially ironically, it calmed down when they went from 20 to 25,000, right?
Exactly.
Which meant that it wasn't as tight in there anymore. There's probably less booze being snuck in, I bet.
Probably. That's another good point.
Yeah, and this is where I come down on this right here is that I don't think BMO would be that for them. It's 30,000 seats now. Like the Argos can't fill 30,000 seats. You're going to have big gaps in there. It's going to look just like TFC when TFC is dead. Going to have pockets of support in there, but it's not going to, which is what they have at the Dome right now. You have like the Argonauts, they call them, those guys that play the instruments in the crowd and all that. It's kind of not quite the same as supporters in MLS. They're a little less. They're a little more PG, but they're having a fun time. But the rest of the crowd is just kind of bored in there. And that's absolutely what it's going to look like in there. I have no faith in this idea that simply putting the Toronto Argos in a slightly smaller stadium outdoors in the freezing cold in a place where they didn't like it before, like on the Lakeshore back when the Exhibition Stadium wasn't a very good stadium. But at the same time, it's almost exactly the same location. You just have the same problems you had down there. It's windy in BMO Field. It is bloody cold down there if you've never been in there during the spring or the fall.
It's hard to get there. Simple enough that it's hard to get there.
Yeah, and I think the Skydome is more accessible. And the 905ers, which are generally who go to Argos games, are going to drive in, and they're going to find it more difficult to get to BMO. It is not a solution. There is no tailgating going to really be allowed around there. They tolerate it a bit with TFC, but most of TFC crowd goes to the Brazen Head or the Shoeless Joe's or the Joker or whatever, the bars around there. They don't go and tailgate necessarily. RPB does it occasionally, but it's not really the culture around there, and the police aren't really that accommodating to it. So, I don't think you're going to see massive amounts of barbecue and booze in the Lampard parking lot. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be this nirvana that they picture. They just look at what was basically a dumb luck in Montreal. Yeah. Where they caught lightning in a bottle for a few years, and people just sort of had fun. And the other part of it in Montreal, too, that I think a lot of people here are overlooking on the Argos side of this, is that the sport itself is massively popular in Quebec.
Yes.
Cégep is they watch Cégep teams like religiously. They watch the Laval
or Montreal this year. I got to plug it. Montreal won the Vanier Cup this year.
The Montreal Carabin. Like Sherbrooke has a team. Like it's really popular there. Like they get big crowds for their university games. Like we're talking
20,000 for the Rouge et Or, Dwayne.
Yeah, that's outrageous. Like that would never. You get like 200 for a UT game, right? Like I'm not kidding. You get about 200 for a UT game. I've said it before. I think the city of Toronto might be the least American football, Canadian football market in North America. There's just not a huge appetite. It's not part of the culture. There are big NFL fans here for sure, but they're not in the majority. And they don't like CFL. They have they're the we call them Euro snobs in the MLS side.
They're
but
the Canadian snobs.
Yeah, they have a snobbery for the NFL over the CFL as well. So putting them down there would be a Band-Aid. It would keep them alive for a while. I understand the desperation that they're in the Argos. I do not relish being the guy that is banging the drum to basically put them in a near extinction standpoint. But at this point in time, screw them. The soccer fans just have to fight for what they earn. and if you want to, the last thought on this, and I didn't intend for this to necessarily be an Argos discussion more than a TFC discussion, but I think we beat the other side of this issue to death, and it's worthwhile. But the other side of this, as you hear it from the Argos side, is that they say that because the public funding went into BMO Field, that it's fair to put to force the Argos into BMO. Well, I played the money, or I looked at the money over the last 5 years of CFL stadium expenditure. It's outrageous. I made a very conservative estimation on CSN of, I think, $700 million in public funds spent on CFL Stadium since 2007 is the date I used, because I included the BC Place roof. And I actually I was very conservative. I cut the BC Place roof in half because the Whitecaps play there. I took the Lansdowne Live project and cut it in half because the Ottawa Fury play there. I eliminated the kind of fishy public loan scheme that they have going on in Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, even though I have very little faith that those loans are going to be ever paid off. I eliminated those from the equation too, and it was just pure, like, here's money, go build yourself a toy, $700 million. And to me, this is where the Argo fans need to be focusing on, is how the hell come there's $700 million being spent elsewhere and we can't get a damn penny, and we have to beg soccer players, those pansy Europeans, we have to beg them for them to throw us scraps. That's essentially, I'm invoking the voice of the stupider end of their spectrum to make a point there. It's just, they need to build their own damn stadium. If they do that, they're going to be fine, because they will control revenue. It doesn't matter how nice the party is in the crowd. If you're not controlling your revenue, it doesn't help.
What's that saying? Build it and they will come.
Yeah, all right. Let's move on this. I wanted to talk briefly about the Whitecaps because we haven't really, again, they're playing stand pat this offseason. I do, to be serious, and, people are aware of my occasional rants against the Whitecaps, but, from a purely MLS building team strategy, building a core and building around it is absolutely the right move.
Yep.
Whether they have the right core, time will tell. That's as far as I'll say now. I tend to think that they're not as good as people think they are, that they're a mid-table club, but time will tell. One of their biggest weaknesses last year, of course, was with Camilo gone. They couldn't score goals. I think that's going to be what they have to do again. I found an interesting interview this week where Carl Robinson said that he thinks the Whitecaps are going to score 25 more total goals. That's almost improving their goal scoring rate by almost a goal a game is ambitious, to say the least. I'm not sure I see that. For the record, 25 more goals to the Whitecaps total would have put them second in the league last year. Essentially, when Carl Robinson says a statement like that, he's expecting the Whitecaps to be championship contending level. And if they score 25 more goals over the season, they will be championship level containing teams. I'm just not sure they're quite there yet, Kevin. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, 25 more goals for one team, that's a tough ask. You're asking more than one player contribution 100% of the season. It's like the record for goals in the league is 27 by one player. And DeVio 22, 23 for Camilo a couple years ago. So basically, you're just you should have kept Camilo. That's the whole thing, right? They should have just kept Camilo a year ago.
Yeah, well, and they tried to do that cheap. They should have just gave him a raise. They should have made him a DP. And that absolutely would have been a perfectly legitimate DP signing, especially an internal signing there for them to do. But they wanted to force him. This kind of speaks to the CBA stuff. They wanted to use the leverage that they felt they had, to force him to play at a lower number, and that was a game of poker that they lost, and it really hurt them because if you add Camilo 2 years ago to Vancouver's lineup last year, they're probably, instead of playing in that 4-5 game. Might have been in up 3. I don't know if they're 1-2, but they might have had a home advantage. They might have been able to get a home playoff date if you add his goals to the equation last year. So, look, they've added some players there. They've added some pieces. On paper, they look to be maybe moderately better than last year. Although I have questions about the backline a little bit.
Yes.
I have questions about the durability and how some of those bodies are going to hold up over a long season. And this would go for anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter how young your team is, how old your team is. If you're going to play on that crap they play on all year, you're going to get worn down.
Yeah, and they're going to have a new crap to play on at the middle of the season. It's getting a new turf this year. So hopefully it maybe helps the players health-wise to maybe stay a little bit in shape more.
Yeah, well, it is an advantage to them to a certain extent, but I always maintain that as much as that, the ping pong concrete ball they play out there at home is an advantage to a certain level. It also is a disadvantage over the course of a long season. So we'll see. And all that said, I appreciate the irony of a guy that's been talking about research all year and not having any proof that that's the case. So I'll put that caveat out there. I could be talking out my ass. That is entirely possible, but that is my perspective, and it certainly is the perspective of a lot of players. And where it does hurt 100% is their ability to attract a big-name DP. It's why Vancouver hasn't ever signed one yet. And why I think they go after the young South Americans so much is because the turf is less of an issue for them. Getting a big European in there, like we're not talking Kenny Miller here, boys. We're a big one. It's going to be a battle because they have to overcome two obstacles. They have to overcome or three obstacles, really. They have to overcome the fact they're not in LA. They have to overcome the fact they're not in the United States. And then they have to overcome the fact that they play on concrete. And if they can do that, then, God willing, they might get a DP one day of a massive stature. And but until that time, it ain't happening.
Do you really think that the turf could be one of the reasons why they never really attracted a known name before?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And I mean, the argument that they will counter with is that Seattle's got a name, but Seattle,
it's got 66,000 people paying a lot of money.
And you know what? It's Dempsey that came over. Lundberg before that, but that was a guy looking for a paycheck, and that was before they kind of were aware of the thing, of the surface being that much of an issue. And he didn't last that long. When you're talking about American, I think that there's less resistance, and the idea of playing in front of 66,000 in what they would view as the hotbed of soccer in the U.S. that or Portland. I'm not going to get into that battle, folks. I'm not taking sides there. However, one of those two that attracted to them. But a foreign player is going to look at that crowd in Seattle, which are nice crowds, no doubt, and just kind of yawn because they've seen it 1,000 different places, right? It's just unique in the United States, not unique in the world, and it doesn't have the same pull. So that's the type of player that they're going to have to go after, even in Seattle, until they fix their problem of that turf. And they're talking about it. Unfortunately, you just don't hear Vancouver talking about it anymore, and it could be soured because of the stupidity of the last time that they tried to build a stadium, and they were willing to pay for it with every penny of it with private funds, and got shot down by downtown NIMBYs, basically. So maybe they just don't want the fight anymore and are happy in BC Place. But that's going to be holding them back, I think.
All right, Dwayne, just before we wrap this up, what's your prediction for Tuesday night, the CONCACAF Champions League with Montreal and Pachuca?
3-0.
For who?
The Impact, clearly. Look, I honestly... and look, we've had this discussion before in various, for very many years on my old podcast, on this podcast. No Canadian should feel obligated to have to cheer for the Impact tomorrow. However, I don't think it's wrong if you're a Whitecaps or a TFC fan to have a soft spot for them tomorrow. However, you don't have to cheer for them if you follow me. My personal philosophy is I hope that they are competitive and they don't that they do enough in that first leg to allow their fans to have a decent night out on the home leg without walking in down 4 goals or something. And I'm not entirely – I think it could go either way. I think that if the Impact allow a couple goals in the first half, it could be ugly. But if they can stay stuck in and get out of there down 2-0 or something, they're still not going to win the tie. Mexico's going to score on the road. Yeah. But – I would literally put the chances of them winning the tie at 2%. It's sports. Stuff
so
can
you're
happen.
Saying there's a chance?
Exactly. That is the exact context that I am saying. There's a chance to. Yeah, no, it's a Mexican team. They're better. The Mexican League is better than MLS. That is just a simple reality that has been proven over and over again. And until MLS addresses a lot of its shortcomings in terms of how it attracts players and in terms of how rosters are built, that's not going to change. And that brings us back to the CBA again, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot here. But I'm just happy that I will be happy in front of my TV tomorrow at 10 o'clock if I've recovered from the Barcelona City game, which we don't talk about that at any rate.
But speaking about teams better than the other ones, KM's national team will play 2 friendly in the upcoming days.
Yeah, Guatemala and Puerto Rico. You know what? These are on the road in CONCACAF in the places that have bedeviled them in the past. Puerto Rico... they played Puerto Rico in the last World Cup. So was the last cycle or 2 cycles ago?
Getting my cycles ago.
2 cycles ago. Yeah, they were terrible to watch. It was an awful game at BMO Field in November. Yeah, it was 2 cycles ago. They drew them 0-0 at BMO. It was one of the worst performances I've seen. They just couldn't score. But at any rate, it's good to play that. And they're playing Puerto Rico essentially because they wanted to play an island of a similar size that they're going to have to play in those knockouts to get used to playing on bad pitches, probably. So that's a good thing to do. It's strategic. It's forward-thinking. It's something the CSA wouldn't have done in the past. So good for them there. Guatemala is a bang-on friendly. They need to be playing Guatemala, El Salvador, those kind of teams as much as they can down there, as often as they can in the lead up to the semifinal round, which they should by all. I was talking to James McLeod of Voyageurs president last night, actually, or 2 nights ago now, and he said we agreed that if they can't get past the Dominica, we're done. We're leaving. We're gonna start a crochet podcast and just walk away because we might as well just give up at that point.
Hey, maybe we should start a cricket podcast.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I don't fully understand cricket. It's like the only sport in the world I don't really get, but I could probably pretend, so that'd be fine.
Hey, another sport where we're not going to be in the World Cup, so trading 4 quarters for $1.
I don't know. They've been in the 2020 World Cup. Team Brampton does well. It is Team Brampton almost universally, so at any rate. Okay, Kevin. A reminder that we do have the USL president, Tim Holt, on the show tomorrow. We're going to do an interview with him entirely focused on the USL's role in Canada, what his feelings are on how the USL can help Canada, what their plans are, how they will work with an NASL, any potential Canadian League stuff. And then we'll do a little bit of a talk after that, Kevin and I. I have some Canadian League news that I'll put into that podcast. It's not a big update. Don't get too excited, but I can give you a little bit of update on what's going on there. I can give you a little bit of update on the NASL side of things, on the Canadian CSA side of things, and we'll just have a nice little chat tomorrow. So we do look forward to that. That will be coming out tomorrow being Tuesday if you're listening to this after the fact, so it could already be out there. But we do thank Tim Holt for giving us this time, and we hope to use it well. If you are listening to this today, Monday, or before it happens Tuesday, it's happening. We're taping at 11 a.m., so 11 a.m. Eastern for those that want to know that. And if you're listening to it before that, by all means, shoot us a question on the Twitters at Two Saltitudes Pod, and we'll have a look at them, and we'll try and get as many of those in as we can.
Absolutely. And tomorrow night, if you're in Montreal, 10 p.m., La Cage au Sport Saint-Léonard. That's where I'll be to watch the CONCACAF Champions League game. The studio is coming with me. A live halftime show and a post-game show for After Woodworks, live from the Cage au Sport Saint-Léonard. So you're in the area, come say hi. And until tomorrow night, have a great soccer.